Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this special live stream of the Red Nation Podcast. We are joined by two lovely guests. Of course, my name is Nick Estes. I'm the co-host of the Red Nation Podcast. So you can see this is a podcast about the wonderful news that we heard today, historic news about the Leonard Peltier being granted clemency. Before we get into discussions with our guests, I just wanted to go over like what the facts are that we know so that we're all on the same page here, because there's a lot of, this just happened this morning. Literally, when it was posted on the White House press briefing website, that website was taken down just minutes after Trump was inaugurated. So you can't really find the press release online right now. There's a lot of news stories that have covered it. So I wanted to actually show the physical copy of the actual clemency so that we're all on the same page here. And I don't know if anyone can see this. It looks like it's in the center of the screen. This is the executive clemency that was issued from President Biden. And I'll just read it, executive grant of clemency. This is on the DOJ website. By Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States, former president, to all to whom these presents shall come, greeting, I hereby commute the remainder of the total sentence of imprisonment imposed upon Leonard Peltier. That has his, I think that's his BOP number, to be served in its entirety on home confinement, to take effect February 18th, 2025. I leave intact all other components of this sentence. So that's kind of an important part right there. I leave intact all other components of the sentence. And executive clemency is not an acknowledgement of innocence. It's just a commutation of the sentence. Sometimes it happens in terms of releasing somebody directly from prison. In this case, it's a commutation to home confinement. So he hereby designates and direct and empower the pardon attorney as my representative to deliver to the Bureau of Prisons a certified copy of the signed warrant as evidence. This is the signed warrant of my action in order to carry into effect the terms of these grants of clemency and to deliver a certified copy of the signed warrant to each person to whom I have granted clemency as evidence of my action. So this was done on Washington. So this is done in the city of Washington, December 19th of January. So this is done in yesterday. It wasn't actually finalized. It wasn't released to the public until today. So that's the official clemency. Just so we know. And I want to just turn it over. Let's start with Eugene. You are a survivor of the 1975 Oglala shootout. You've also been a long time supporter of Leonard Peltier's freedom. You've also defied a grand jury subpoena, and trying to get you to rat out other people who, you were involved with. But I just wanted to get your reflection. Also, when you did that, by the way, people need to know this. You were a minor, right? So the FBI targeted you as a child, not as an adult. I think that's something that's really important that people forget about the shootout. But sorry to put that in there, but I just wanted to get your reactions to this news. What do you think and how are you feeling?
It's really unbelievable, and I'm so excited for Leonard. And, it's a travesty. They had to spend 50 years, and his co-defendants were acquitted on the basis of self-defense. When they tried to make me their snitch, it was really ironic because they took us out of the home, me and my brother, who was 11, in handcuffs, and took us down the federal building. And at that time, I had injury, so I was sitting there with bandages on in front of all these, white people from my community here. And I knew that part of being in front of a grand jury, you're allowed to ask for your lawyer. And I kept asking to speak to my lawyer. They're not allowed to come in. And they just sat there and just ignored it. They ignored their own laws. And that's one thing that they've been doing about Leonard Peltier, is totally ignoring, their own constitution and changing it to meet their need. And their need is to have revenge. They never talk about Joe Stuntz that was killed that day, or the other many, many people that have been victims of their labeling. Anime Aquash. She was labeled by the FBI. Everybody should know that. They really tried to make a case against Leonard Peltier being involved. It's all bullshit. You know what I mean? I've witnessed their interactions. And no matter what you say, you can't change that fact. And by Biden releasing him, that's really an interesting step. And I'm not sure with all the conditions on it. I know what he's really saying. You're not saying that they were wrong, but that would be a start. If they want to have a relationship with our tribes, they need to be honest people, and not acknowledging Leonard's sacrifice is not honesty, or the part that they did to keep him incarcerated all these years is totally disgusting. And there's so many things that racism is the bottom line to a lot of this, or resources. They're still after our Black Hills, and Leonard's always been fighting for the Black Hills. That's always been the fight for American Indian movement, is to protect our Mother Earth. Let's not forget that. Let's not remember all the FBI labeling and all the attacks that the FBI has done on our women. Very important. They started out with manipulating Myrtle Poorbear, threatening her with her life, along with, this is like Anime was the first one they threatened. We can't forget that. And there's a pattern of them going after women, abusing them and using them to get what they want, or to say what they want people to hear or say. So, yeah, it's been a long line of abuse. And I'm glad that, the terrible shape that Leonard's in right now, they should pay for that. They really should.
How old were you at the time of the grand jury interrogation? Just so folks to know.
I just turned 15.
So you're 15 years old at that time. I think that's important context to this, because as you said, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And after 5 decades of misinformation, of this counterintelligence program that has been waged, not just on Leonard Peltier, but an entire history, our freedom struggle, that this moment, comes as relief to 5 decades of organizing. I remember going to the first, commemoration for the Oglala shootout, and just seeing all the elders. To them, it was fresh in their minds. Yes. In terms of what had happened. This is not something that is a distant past. It's not something that is, confined to a certain history or time period. There have been concrete demands for accountability and justice. There are real stories, real victims who deserve justice in this case. And I think one of the biggest travesties and misinformations, and you can even see it right now, prominent people are still pushing the same sad FBI narrative that Leonard Peltier had something to do with Anime Aquash's murder. And it's actually an absolute travesty that this government can commit a genocide for the last 15 months, but you're still willing to lick the boot of their disinformation campaign in light of all the evidence that suggests otherwise. What they're willing to do, they're willing to incarcerate an elder and keep him in prison for 5 decades. So I think that's an important sort of aspect. I want to turn it over to you, Janine. Janine Yazzie, you need no introduction. No, Janine and I have known each other for quite some time. She's a strong advocate for Leonard Peltier, amongst many other things. She's a member of the Navajo, or citizen of the Navajo Nation. And yeah, Janine, what are your initial reactions on this clemency announcement, but also what does this mean for the movement right now?
We were on pins and needles all the way up until the last possible moment. I mean, it's frustrating that with so much on the line, and with all of the work that has been done for decades to explain to every administration, and more so in this administration, Biden's administration, about the significance that this would mean to let Leonard go home and be free to honor that he has held the integrity of maintaining his innocence, and that those that have been responsible for putting him behind bars and contributing to the ways that this unjust carceral system got its claws in him and has been holding on to him, and tormenting him by pitting him in a high maximum facility, by refusing to properly address his many complicated healthcare needs, and continuing to villainize him in the narrative that they've been promoting, like what the FBI themselves have been promoting, to just like to hold all of that and like to plead and show all of the evidence that this has been an example of systemic injustice, of a case of spite and vengeance towards the American Indian movement, meant to send a message to all Indigenous peoples that we are not free in this country, and have had that all of the rights violations that Leonard faced in leading up to his incarceration and throughout his incarceration, validated by those who assisted in those rights violations, calling for President Biden to grant him executive clemency, and us waiting until the last fucking 20 minutes of his administration to hear that he is granted a commutated sentence, and that is reduced to home confinement. And although we are so grateful that Leonard, after all of this time, gets to return to his homelands, gets to be surrounded by loved ones, gets to have access to the healthcare that he's always deserved, gets to just rest and be in peace with and have the ability to share the medicine and the love that he's always carried while he's been incarcerated. I feel like we're also holding this relief with conditions, just like his commutation is like done with conditions, because we have been unequivocal in communicating to the Biden administration that Leonard's freedom is a necessary step for restoring the relationship with Indigenous peoples in this country. He is the longest serving political prisoner, and everything that he fought for are many of the things that our generation now benefit from. The freedom of religion, our right to practice our culture, our right to restore our languages, our right to restore and practice our ways of living, and all of the ways that these gifts, these beautiful things about our people, contribute the alternative pathways to some of humanity's most complex and compounding challenges, such as climate change, such as systemic injustice, such as the need to provide alternatives to this corporate capitalist model of economy that is imprisoning our people, widening the wealth gap, and deepening racial tensions. All of these things that have been brought by colonization and these colonial institutions are things that Leonard was a part of addressing and naming and fighting and standing in resistance to in a prayerful and peaceful way. And he was punished for that. And so his full freedom, his full commutation and clemency was what we were always fighting for. But we'll take this as a win and a victory that was achieved over decades of advocacy, from everyone from grassroots elders, grassroots youth, to international human rights advocates, to Nobel Peace Prize winners. There were so much love poured into this, and it's not lost on me the significance of him being released and of many of our Palestinian relatives being released. Palestinian relatives also reached out because they heard the news, and in the midst of everything that they're going through, they're also celebrating this with us, because they're also going through the process of realizing and grieving and celebrating the release of some of their elders, of some of their long-held prisoners. And they're still reaching out in this moment to celebrate this with us. And so I think that exemplifies that, this is a big win for us. And it's still just a step towards our larger goals of freeing all of our peoples from these systems of oppression.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Janine. I think you both really kind of encompassed the pivotal points in this particular campaign, because unfortunately in this country, we have Native people who are incarcerated at higher rates than other folks. This is a mass incarceration society. I don't, go anywhere else in the world, even those countries you think that are authoritarian, and they simply do not have the number of people in prisons that this country does. And it specifically targets Black and Indigenous people. And this is indicative of a larger kind of phenomenon. Our elder Lenny Foster, who, just days ago called me on the phone, he butt dialed me, but he was telling me about like how, they have denied Leonard Peltier access to spiritual ceremonies. He was his spiritual advisor. Lenny Foster is a veteran of Wounded Knee, a Navajo, spiritual leader. He was denied access to see Leonard Peltier. Why? Because he was considered a friend of Leonard Peltier. So while, priests and other kind of denominations of faith were allowed to see prisoners in that way, Leonard Peltier was denied many times access to guidance from a spiritual leader, but also access to his ceremonies. We have Rachel Thunder, who's back on. I know she was took a brief moment to maybe talk to the media, but I want to just introduce Rachel too. Like, one thing that's kind of interesting about Leonard Peltier is he's kind of brought all of us together in various ways. I met Rachel when she helped led the walk to DC. And she's now living in Minneapolis, and we're part of the Indigenous Protectors movement. She's in the office there. She's got, shout out to IPM. But Rachel, I just want to get your thoughts on this historic news, what has happened, and, what this means for our people.
Right. Well, the last several days have been so emotional for me, and I know so many people here in community and people that are in our circle and people that I've talked to. This hope, right? This hope that has been with our people for generations, that not only that Leonard would be free, but what this means for all of us as Native people, as Indigenous people. For the past days, I've been constantly refreshing my White House page and seeing statement after statement, and my pessimism, my generational pessimism was at an all-time high. I'm like, if it hasn't happened for Leonard, why is it going to happen now? And it happened, right? That prayer, that call, that work was answered for our people and for Leonard. And, we were talking about, I say we, like our team, we were talking about like, what was different now? Why was this different? And I think that there are some key differences that we can kind of go into in this podcast, but they're really, for me, it was a culmination of everything that has happened for 5 decades. It was from the moment of the shootout at Oglala to now. It was the perfect timing, the perfect handing over of this work from generation to generation, the knowledge built from generation to generation, the strategy changes, the political climate shifting and changing over generations. Like, just look at how much has changed in 5 decades for our people as a whole across Turtle Island. And so what you had today was this culmination of activism that has happened, this polarity that has gained over the past several years, in conjunction with the work and the sacrifice that has happened from people for decades. And it was just this perfect timing politically for Leonard to be released. you know, like when I first met you, Nick, right? Like coming off of that, the momentum of when Obama almost granted him clemency. During that time period, it was like, yeah, everybody knew who Leonard was, but he wasn't as common of a topic. And I just think about all the advocacy that has happened, like between the Leonard Peltier Defense Committee, AIM, the Walk, Indian Collective, and like how it has catapulted his name forward to ultimately this release today.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rachel. And on that note of like this long campaign that has so many ups and downs, twists and turns, betrayals, high moments, I want to actually turn to Jean, because you've been the longest kind of, well, not to out you in age, you know, a respected elder over here. But
it's all
give
in
us,
no ages and number.
yeah, exactly.
No, maybe we can grow old.
Yeah. But maybe give us some historical insight on this and your participation in the campaign, you know, as a youth to now as an elder. What has that looked like? What are the lessons that you think that this generation can draw?
Well, yeah, it's been a long time. And when it first happened in the 70s, people really thought we were like crazy calling out the FBI. You know, you have this show that's on mainstream TV about them and how good they are. And we're like, no, that doesn't work here. We know the real story of who they are and what they've done to our people. So educating people, fighting the, you know, propaganda that the COINTELPRO put out. And still to date, you're right. You know, we've been attacked. But to me, I already know that the truth is the one that will prevail. So you can say whatever you want, and I got a new car, I got a new house, whatever, you know. And, you know, it was just an attack on the International Leonard Peltier Defense Committee. But I told my board, man, all women, really strong. And I've known them for several years because I already know the Peltier Committee has gone through backstabbing. And like you said, there's so many things that have happened, the attacks on it. So when he asked me to be director, I took that as with knowledge of the past. So I picked my board. The ones that were making money and had a financial interest, they all fell off, right? Because Leonard was mad at the time. So all the women I put on there were all longtime friends, and they stood beside me. And when people were attacking us, I just told them, you know, don't react. You know, let's be the better person. And it actually worked out. And, you know, it's COINTELPRO still out there. You know, beware of your circles. You know, people stab you in the back and don't even know what they're talking about. So the misinformation is a big part of the FBI's fight to keep Leonard Peltier in there. So just knowing your sources and knowing the people that you're standing with is really important, because we still have a lot of fights left, you know, or sacred land is being attacked everywhere, or water. So that's always been our fight. It's not always just Leonard Peltier. We've always stuck up for prisoners, you know, trying to get, you know, the sweat lodges going in different areas. Just the work is just for the people, really. So we can't just say that we were actually only a Leonard Peltier activist, because that brings the whole circle in: the water, the earth, the people, you know, our lifestyle, our survival, you know. So I think that whatever fight you have is very important, and you're all part of the bigger circle. So keep going. It pays off. We're finding out.
Yeah, thanks so much for that perspective, because I think it's important to really think about like what it means to keep this kind of campaign going for 5 decades, because the end of it is supposed to be the release of this person, right? And it's not supposed to continue for 5 decades. I think people forget that. And so that is why we have, and then also the constant attacks. It's like they just have more resources. You know, even today I was reading the AP. I don't know if anyone read the AP, the Affiliated Press article that came out. The headline was, you know, something like Leonard Peltier, you know, granted clemency by Biden, but then at the end of it, it said something like for killing, imprisoned for killing 2 FBI agents. There's not even a contextualization around that, because that's a little more complicated than that headline. And in fact, it lends itself to legitimize a narrative that has been continuously debunked for 5 decades. But we don't control the media, but that our source of power is not these corporate media channels. It's our movements. And in the last couple of years, we've seen just a reignition of the flame, or the flame just got bigger in terms of Leonard Peltier's clemency. And that had to do with Standing Rock, that had to do with the water protector struggles that began in the 2010s. And before that, it wasn't just, this isn't a new thing. I don't think anyone, not me especially, I'm deeply humbled by the campaign itself, and listening to the stories of all the elders and the veterans who survived and who spent time and who gave their freedom for us to have these movements. And there's so many lessons to be learned, as you point out, Jean. And I think the biggest one for me is, don't believe everything you hear. What are the sources? The simple fact of the matter is that most people who know about this campaign are still alive today. You can talk to them, you can call them, you can go to the place, and people will tell you what had happened. And still in this media environment, people want a soundbite. People want, even our own people will repeat things that they hear on the news, or like misinformation, without even just maybe picking up the phone and calling somebody. And so this is a huge lesson. It shows you that having that sort of steadfast determination and knowing what is the truth, because there are people who've been speaking the truth over and over and over and over again, not just Leonard Peltier, not just Jean Roach, not just, all these other people, but hundreds and thousands of people have been saying this and have experienced this, and were witness to the intimidation, to the terror that was inflicted, and the violence that was inflicted. This isn't something that is an abstract idea. It really impacted people's lives. People lived with it. So I think that's an incredibly useful lesson, especially for this particular moment in time for our movements. Janita, I want to turn to you and just kind of maybe get some perspective on Indians' role. I know I watched the press conference outside of the prison that was released earlier today, and it was very clear to me that Indian was not claiming credit for this win, that they were saying specifically that this is a win of the people of the 5 decades of people, of elders who have passed away, who have gone before us and have come before us, that it's really their win. And I want to just hear some perspective on Indians' role in this campaign and what it means for the rest of Indian country.
Absolutely. Indian, it's a byproduct of the American Indian movement, of the Indigenous rights movement in the United States. We're a movement organization. And in the work that we do, spearheaded by our CEO and founder, Nick Tilson, we very much stay rooted in that humility and in that gratitude for the generations of resistance that came before us, that have shaped the organizing conditions that we are now able to operate in, that have built the frameworks that we are utilize as tools to continue to advocate for our self-determination, for our rights as Indigenous peoples, for our rights to ceremony, and for the vision that we hold for our peoples, to be able to enact those visions and build those solutions that can bring sustainability, resilient food systems, regenerative economies back to our nations, and restore our traditional forms of leadership. And so with all of that movement knowledge and wisdom and holding that center to how we move, our organization has really just been consistent in trying to find the best ways possible to utilize the mechanism and the infrastructure that we built and really hone in on the effective ways to support and fill the gaps in advocating for Leonard Peltier's freedom. And a part of that has been, we have 115 employees, I think a little bit more than that. And every single one of them was briefed educated, involved in understanding all of the intricacies and complexities about this case so that we could move with integrity, so that we could be able to identify and know how to respond to those counterintelligence program attacks, COINTELPRO attacks, and this endearing narrative that has been planted and seeded by the FBI that you all alluded to, that was really structured to divide Indigenous support for Peltier, because there's no other evidence to have held him or justified his continued incarceration. So division among our communities was a tactic that was used for this end. And so we knew that it was our role as a movement organization to continue to stand steadfast against that and to keep our eye on the prize. And in preparation for his parole hearing, our organization did a lot of really loving work, working with the Turtle Mountain Reservation and the government officials there, working with all of the organizations that have for a long time been advocates for this. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention International Indian Treaty Council, who brought me into this work as a teenager, who helped train me and support me in bringing Leonard Peltier's statements to the United Nations when I was just 19. All of those partners that we know have been on the field, and knowing that this is a campaign that unites us all, because this is a campaign that's about all of those systemic issues and challenges that we all face, and finding the ways that as a funder, which is one of the things that we do, we can provide the support and the resources necessary to ensure that Leonard has a safe place to land. And so in preparation for his parole hearing, one of the things that we did a lot of work on is figuring out what is a reintegration plan? What is a plan for getting Leonard Peltier home? Because there is little to no support systems for people who are criminalized in these systems. And, this is why the work with Peltier, like Jean so eloquently said, has always been based on an abolitionist framework and a recognition that all people of color that are criminalized and incarcerated in these systems are vulnerable to a lifetime of systemic violence and injustice as a result of it. And so knowing that there are no programs and support systems that can help that reintegration, that's where we stepped in to make sure that Leonard has a community, a safe home, a furnished home, to be able to go home to. And that really helped ground our prayers and our ceremonies in a very tangible way, to give all of us, including Leonard, something to visualize for him to return home to. And it makes me so emotional, because I know there are so many people that have passed that dedicated their whole lives hoping for that day, hoping to be able to witness when their brother and their comrade was able to be free and return home too. And I'm so proud to be part of an organization that has just moved with such love and compassion and awareness to make sure that we honor all of those hopes and those prayers and those ceremonies and that fight that has been made by the generations before, to make sure that Leonard has a safe place to go home, to be surrounded by the love and the peace that he deserves.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I think it was Rachel that said earlier, or was talking about this kind of inbuilt trauma response that we have, where we just disbelieve things when they happen, because there's this Simon Ortiz poem, he's an Acoma Pueblo poet, and he, it's called When Indians Smile, or Smiling Indians. I can't remember the title, but it's talking about how they won this water rights settlement. And it's because it's an interesting poem, because Indians aren't supposed to win. We're not supposed to win this fight. We're not supposed to be alive. Or, we are evidence of this criminal empire. We are the first targets of this empire. And this is a huge win in many ways. It's so hard to encapsulate in just, a single podcast or a single perspective. And it came to this point, when I was having this kind of not disbelief, I was just being pessimistic. I was like, this system is so genocidal, it is so racist, that there's no way that they're going to let him get out of prison. And instead of being inundated with the dopamine casino that's called our smartphones and just hitting refresh all the time, I went out to the river. There's an eagle's nest not far from my house where I take my daughter, and I just had a prayer, and honest to God, like after I had my prayer, I looked in Rachel and everybody that we're keeping up with it, is like, he's out. He's clemency has been granted, and it's because of that belief, that prayer and that belief that has lived on. It's not just with one generation, it's with, this generation. It's like, it's a win for our youth, people who weren't even alive. Like Leonard Peltier, I wasn't even alive when this happened. I was born a decade after this happened. But why is it important to my generation? Because it's my fight. He's one of ours. He's inside, I've internalized that over, the past decade since I've been working on this campaign. And there's no going back. Once you're in, you're in. You can't go back. Once you learn the truth, you can't go back. There is nothing anyone can say to me that's going to make me believe what they did to our people is right or moral, or what is happening now is moral or just. But I want to just turn it over to Rachel to kind of talk about the walk, because I think that was a pivotal moment in all of this. We had the 50th anniversary of Wounded Knee happened during this campaign, but the walk to justice for Leonard Peltier, which began here in the Twin Cities, the birthplace of the American Indian movement, that really, what seemed like a wave turned into a tidal wave, and I just want to get your reflections on that, Rachel, as somebody who was, one of the key leaders of that walk, like why it happened, and what is its legacy. It'll go down in history as one of the important kind of signature events of this campaign.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I was thinking back to like the beginning of like my involvement in the work for Leonard, and I grew up my whole life, right, hearing the stories of what happened and all of the sacrifices that people had made, and the sacrifice that Leonard was continuing to make. And when I got more active as an adult in the American Indian movement, going to meetings, going to ceremonies, I started questioning, why weren't we doing more for Leonard Peltier as the American Indian movement? And there were these dreams that I started having these dreams. At first they were dreams about Leonard, where I would be in his cell with him, and he would never say anything, and he would just be sitting there with his face in his hands. And I would just, in all of these dreams, I'd be telling him, don't worry, your people are coming. Don't worry, AIM is coming. And so I started sharing those dreams with leaders in the movement, with spiritual leaders, and ultimately through those conversations and through ceremonies, that's how the planning for the Walk to Justice started. And I think about our leaders that are no longer with us. I think about Frank Pero and the conversations that I had with him, as he was in executive leadership of the American Indian movement. I think about Crow Dog and him hoping and praying that he would die being able to see Leonard free. I think about Clyde Belcourt. We were having conversations with Clyde, back when he was still alive, about planning this walk. And both Crow Dog and Clyde passed before the walk started, but Frank was still with us then. And under his leadership, we were able to complete this walk in the fall of 22. So it took 2 years of planning. We walked from here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, right from Little Earth United Tribes, all the way to Washington, D.C. Took 2.5 months, 1,103 miles. And it ended in this rally in D.C. with thousands of, natives, indigenous people, allies, Peltier supporters, people who had been doing this work for decades. Being able to get these collaborative meetings with senators and their staff, and really launching this campaign, this strategy to catapult Leonard's name back into the mainstream media, back into the lives and the vocabulary of American people, not just Indigenous people, not just Native people, but bringing his name forward into today's society. And I think that we were able to accomplish that. And then in the end, took that torch and ran with it, and they did the caravan. They've done these actions in DC. They've done the lobbying. And what I see now is that when we're united as Native people, as Indigenous people, that there is nothing that we cannot do. I think that for so many years, we felt like Leonard was a lost cause because so many people had tried to do this work for so long. And we can't let ourselves get beaten down like that when it comes to these big, overwhelming issues, because look at what we did. This is not just me, Rachel Thunder, or the American Indian movement. This is we as a people, that we were able to take a fight that a lot of people already thought was a lost cause and win. Leonard is free. Leonard is going to be released. Leonard is going to go home to Turtle Mountain. Leonard is going to hug his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. Leonard is going to be able to go to ceremonies that were illegal when he went to prison. Leonard is going to be able to spend time on the land. And that is because we didn't give up. That we as a people, that we as organizers didn't give up. And that's how powerful we are. We might be the smallest minority in the country, but we are powerful when we lead with prayer and intention and when we're united together. And that for me is what this represents.
Yeah, those are really good words to think about, especially because this is a moment we're entering the Trump presidency fighting. This is momentum right here. Again, I don't want to give President Biden, Genocide Joe, any credit for this, because it's really the pressure from the millions across the world and the grassroots people here in Turtle Island that pushed this and made it happen. It's our victory. It's not a victory for the Democrats. How many Democratic presidents sat and watched this man, our elder, languish? How many Republican presidents sat and watched this man languish? This is a bipartisan issue in terms of them keeping him in prison, listening to the misinformation by the FBI. The FBI, we had on our show Colleen Rowley, a retired FBI agent, who wrote to President Biden, who said, this is a clear case of vengeance, an FBI family vendetta. This has nothing to do with the rule of law. This has nothing to do with upholding, criminal codes, nothing like that. This is to cover up an FBI mess up. And we've been living with this. We've been paying the consequences. Leonard Peltier, his family, Indian country, has been paying the consequences for the FBI's misdeeds for the past 5 decades since he's been in prison, and even before that. And we're seeing in this current, in this outgoing administration, the absolute disdain that the ruling elite now have for the FBI, because they know it's just a political police force. If we look at murder missing Indigenous women on the reservations, why haven't those cases been solved? Why do we have an epidemic, a structural issue of Indigenous women going missing on reservations? The FBI has the final jurisdiction. They enforce the major crimes on Indian reservations in the United States. So what are they doing? They're spending their time writing op-eds to keep Leonard Peltier in prison, intimidating Congress people to not do investigations into the reign of terror that happened in the 1970s. That's what they're doing. They're a political police force. So there needs to be justice. And I want to just say, the Red Nation podcast has been covering these issues since we started. You can go and check out interviews we did with Jean at one of the Jumping Bull commemoration marches when we went to the grave sites of Joe Stunts and Anime Aquash, who were friends of Leonard Peltier, who both died fighting for the freedom of our people. And she tells the true story of that history and what it meant to be a survivor of the FBI firefight. We have multiple mixtapes that you can check out on our podcast. And also, if you support Indigenous media, but specifically anti-imperialist and independent Indigenous media, please consider donating to our GoFundMe. I'll post the link below in the comments. Any support you can give, if it's just $1. We also have a Patreon. Go to patreon.com/redmedia. Give as much as you can, or just share our show. We keep all of our content free and open on our YouTube channel. But if you want premium access to our podcast, the audio versions or early releases, subscribe to our Patreon. Or if you just want to support our project with a one-time donation, go to that GoFundMe site, because we don't get major corporate sponsorship. We don't get major grants. We are literally just funded by our membership program. So everyone who's been donating $1, $2 a month, you're the only reason why we are still here today. So once you guys stop donating, we will go off the air. Just a shout out to everyone who's been a Patreon supporter. I actually was out in public and I saw a real live Patreon supporter. So I see them in the wild. If you're around, hit me up. If you see me out in the public, if you see one of Red Nation members, hit us up. We'll give you a sticker, and just appreciate and love to all our supporters, because we wouldn't be able to keep doing these stories without you. We wouldn't be going to the Jumping Bull property. We wouldn't have an audience for this. So you are part of this too. You are part of this movement. You've been with us since the very beginning. And we just want to send, much appreciation. With that, I was going to ask a question, Jean, but just go ahead.
I just wanted to remember way back when we first started fighting for Leonard's freedom, we always talked in the spirit of Crazy Horse. So it wasn't an option to quit. And so many supporters, like from 40 years, 50 years, God, they've been here, and they went on to, to the Star Nation, and, took our prayers with them. But the support is so awesome. And I knew it was a matter of time. I didn't know when, but, the truth would come out, and we were up against a genocidal system. And I'd like to thank, Red Nation, Indian Collective, and all the people that started when we really went down to Florida and called the FBI out on their steps when Leonard got COVID. I was so scared at that time, we didn't know what was going to happen. That was all a scare. And one mainstream news company came, I think it was ABC, and they took their story up, and from there it just flourished. And I did interview after interview, and we started the Rise Up for Peltier group. And I'm just so excited and thankful that everyone joined us, because it was really a powerful moment. That's when I feel like a lot of stuff really started coming together. Every one of you guys are part of it.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that press conference you guys held outside of Coleman. Gina, I want to just, as we're kind of wrapping up here, I want to just ask, what, from your perspective, you've been, the longest in this movement. He's getting clemency. He's getting commuted to home confinement, but there's still demands. There's still things that need to happen. One of those was, historically, they've asked for a congressional investigation into the Reign of Terror. Your mother was part of the movement. Your family, your brothers, your sisters were part of the movement. What does justice look like for you from your perspective?
Well, actually, every person that's in prison, they need justice. And if they can't afford a lawyer, or they've been railroaded because of racism, we have one person shoots a person that's non-native, and they never really get charged. Or they, like we have a girl here in Rapid City that was hit and run by a guy, and he did all this stuff to cover the evidence, and he gets a misdemeanor charge. What kind of evidence? What kind of justice is that? And that still continues to date with our missing and murdered Indian Native people. I mean, there's so much going on that we got to reflect, or energy still, time it out to address every issue or support them, because there's still a lot of work to be done, in the prison system, their rights, I mean, there's people in there that have been in there for generations, and they need support too. And we always have people coming to us, where are the lawyers? Where are the lawsuits? I mean, that never is reality for us. We're always, at the bottom, but that's okay. But we still have our belief system, or supportive or people. Without our prayers and our ceremonies, I don't think we'd be here right now. So it's really a happy day today, and it's just the beginning to continue on, because there's nowhere we're near the level of the basic human rights that we all deserve.
Thank you so much for that, Jean. I'll turn it over to Janine. What else needs to be done? What does justice look like in this moment, and how are we going to take the fight to this administration?
Well, first of all, we need to not get too carried away with the commutation. We need to ensure that that is fully carried out in a just way, that respects all of the rights that we need restored back for Leonard as much as possible. And I think we still need to keep fighting for it to be acknowledged that he has maintained his innocence throughout his entire incarceration, and there has still yet to be any evidence to justify the ways that and the reasons and ways that they've imprisoned him for almost 50 years. And so his safety and his health is still of utmost concern. We have to be diligent, because this is a vulnerable time with political prisoners, in the moment where, the announcement is made and then they're actually released. And there's still confusion about that, because in the decree that you read at the beginning of this, it says it's not effective until February 18th. And we know that the prison facility that he's been held in has been vindictive towards him in the past, especially when it brings a lot of unwanted attention to his unjust incarceration. And so this is a critical moment for us to maintain diligence and be vigilant about his care and his safety, to ensure that he does get home, and he gets home as fast as possible, and he gets immediate access to the health care that he needs for his many issues, so that he can spend and enjoy the remainder of his days surrounded by his loved ones. And this is, like I said in my previous intervention, like, this is just the first step for us to continue to fight for the justice and the restoration of peace and security for our peoples, our nations, our tribal nations across the board. And we absolutely cannot let those that have been responsible and culpable for the reign of terror and for the systemic violence that has been visited on our people get away with it, because that invisibility of the role that they've played in carrying out these crimes is also why we see the creation of new laws that continue to be aimed at criminalizing Indigenous rights and land rights and water protectors and land rights defenders. And this is going to be an ongoing problem, as we are now faced with a hostile administration that is going to be carrying out a lot of very harmful policies that impact Indigenous peoples, lands, territories, and resources all across the U.S. From the militarization of borders, the conflicts that's going to bring, from, we need to be diligent in making sure that the ceasefire continues to be implemented, and that we stop arming a genocidal state and being complicit in the genocide that has been carried out, and to ensure that those people are responsible for their crimes as well. And we need to keep fighting for Indigenous rights, for our right to self-determination, for our right to build alternatives to these unsustainable systems, and for land back into Indigenous hands and Indigenous stewardship, so that we can meaningfully and effectively tackle the shared crisis of climate change. And we need to be diligent in how we do this and build better bridges across all of our movements, because right now we're all on the precipice of the need for transformative systemic change in order to address all of the injustices that we are facing as humanity, and to put forward the solutions that we all deserve for current and future generations. And I think that this long battle to get Leonard free is a mirror of the long battle that we have ahead of us, and how important it is to stay vigilant and diligent in holding on to each other and being disciplined and rooting ourselves in prayer and ceremony, and in acting and responding to all of these challenges from a deep commitment to love, for love of all sacred life, for love for each other, so that we're not put into a position of responding from a place of fear and of being reactionary to the chaos and to the attacks that are going to be carried out against our communities, because that's a tactic, and we're not going to be put into a position of being disempowered ever again. We've won too much. We've come too far. We've built too much infrastructure for our resistance, and we're going to keep fighting until everyone is free.
Yeah, it's a really great way to put it. And I just want to thank you both for joining us. And as we kind of wrap this up, I just want to say a couple of things. We still have political prisoners in the United States. Mumia Abu-Jamal, still held by the slave catchers in New York. This struggle doesn't end. And I appreciated what Jean had pointed out, that we have many, many brothers and sisters and relatives who are still behind bars. I consider all of them political prisoners, because this country didn't give them the chances and the rights to succeed. We are working against genocide. We are working against a system that was meant to erase us, in which we were not even included from the very get-go. So this is a historic win. It shows you, we may be the minority of minorities, but we're not. If we were, then why do they need to put a whole prison or a whole movement in prison? Put it in with Leonard Peltier, try to discredit the American Indian movement, try to discredit the Red Power movement, try to discredit and imprison the water protector movement. They haven't won. They haven't done it. We're still here. Nothing that they throw at us, can really break our spirits. We've endured so much. We've endured centuries of genocide, centuries of dispossession, centuries of having our children and our lands taken away from us. Leonard Peltier was a victim and a survivor of the federal Indian boarding school system, a genocidal project that incarcerated children. What kind of system does that? Only in the year 2024 did we ever get an apology for that. Nobody went to prison. The people who implemented that policy, some of them are still alive. Some of them who have benefited from it, the lands that were taken as a result of that boarding school system, are still in the possession of the federal government or private landowners. That land was not returned to us. So that apology is empty when it is not accompanied by real material, substantial change. So we are not here to cry on the shoulder of the people who've taken our children, who have taken our lands. This is about building power. And Leonard Peltier shows us the sacrifices that we have to go through to endure after 5 decades to achieve what, in their minds, they probably think is a small win or a small concession. But it's a major concession, given everything that we have endured and fought for, everything that we have pushed, all those who have come before us, the countless narratives and things that we are just now discovering. They tried to put our movement in prison. They tried to take away everything that we held dear and sacred. They tried to make us afraid in this current, political moment by saying Trump is the big bad boogeyman, while the guy that came before him was literally killing children in Palestine. Those are the options that they want you to have. They want you to have a right-wing fascist demagogue or somebody who's going to just say sorry as they kill you. Those are not options for us, and we reject that framework entirely. And that this win really represents forward momentum, not just in the next 4 years for something different, but in the coming decades, that we are fighting for a future for everyone, a just and sustainable planet. Like, this is not just something that was connected, to one political prisoner in the United States. Leonard Peltier wrote in 1983 from his jail cell, absolute solidarity with the Palestinian people and the fighters in Lebanon as they repelled the genocidal forces that were coming from the Zionist entity. Leonard Peltier has been a steadfast supporter of Palestine, and we recognize that he is one of the political prisoners that was exchanged in this, in this hostage deal. The Zionist entity took Palestinian children hostage, just like this settler colonial entity took our children and our elders hostage. And we recognize that this is an ongoing fight, an ongoing struggle. It has ups and downs, but as Jean said, earlier, it's in those darkest moments, in the spirit of Crazy Horse, we just don't give up. There's no other option for us. There's the only path forward is one in which that is grounded in ceremony and prayer and freedom. And I just have the utmost respect for you. Rachel had to jump off early, and Rachel, for taking the time out of your day to really celebrate and reflect critically on this moment in time, because they tried to steal our future. They tried to take an elder from us, just like they tried to take our children from us, and we got them back. And we're going to keep getting our ancestors back. We're going to keep getting our relatives back. And this is just one step in that direction. And I don't have anything else to say, but I appreciate you both for taking the time, for fighting the good fight. Prayers and blessings to your families, and that you all enjoy this day with friends and families in the best way possible.
Thank you so much, Nick, and love you, Jean, and love to Lenny and Peter Clark and all the people, the warriors who helped this, and Amnesty International. I'm sure they're celebrating too. Native Organizers Alliance, just all the people, all the entities that fought for this moment. And look forward to using this energy and this momentum to achieve even more of our wildest dreams.